got our guest on, our illustrious guest, Nick Carter. Nick graduated from the University of St. Andrews, went on to get his master's degree from the University of Edinburgh Business School. His first job in finance was for Fidelity, and he served as their first ever investment research analyst for crypto. In 2017, he co-founded Coinmetrics. I'm sure most or all of you have used Coinmetrics at some point. It's an open source crypto asset analytics platform for investors. Nick is a founding partner at Castle Island Ventures, a Boston-based VC firm. We'll get into that. I'm not sure anybody's Boston-based anymore, but in theory, a Boston-based VC firm that just raised $250 million for a new crypto fund, targeting startups, obviously in crypto, financial services, Web3, et cetera, et cetera. We'll obviously get into that. Nick is a frequent columnist for CoinDesk, and he hosts a pretty cool podcast, On the Brink. I've listened to it on many of my hikes with his co-host, Matt Walsh. All right, welcome, Nick, to Money Talks.
Thanks, Bill. I'm bashful and embarrassed at that effusive introduction, but yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. So, you're a super popular guy these days. Congrats on the new funds. Tell us all about it.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very excited. New fund raised 250. Continue doing our seed stage equity deals. A lot of it is crypto financial infrastructure, broadening our focus also to quote unquote Web3. A lot of people took umbrage at us saying that we would be doing Web3. I think Web3 is a useful shorthand for tools that allow individuals to interact with internet services in a way that's not highly extractive or exclusionary or risky, that allows them to retain more discretion over their data and their identities online. That's what Web3 means to me. And in conjunction with the raise, we also promoted Principal Ria Batoria to general partner. So there's four of us now.
All right.
4 GPs, and Ria obviously was at Fidelity Digital Assets. She was the head of research there and head of research at Circle before. Great CV, and we really, really, really like her, and we're betting on her. And so those are the headlines. Yeah.
Cool. And where does Bitcoin fit in the overall fund model versus what you might be doing with other kind of layer 1 protocols or Web3, whatnot?
Yeah, so I'm a Bitcoiner through and through, and it's always like a tough tightrope to walk, because as a venture capitalist, you have to look at the market, take it as it is, and you can't be too prescriptive about the market. So, in our case, we listen to founders, and we invest in the founders, whether, regardless of where they're building, frankly, we don't prescribe a certain L1 or particular blockchain for them, or, cross-chain as the case may be. We just look for exceptional founders that are building, very strong businesses that are thesis aligned with us. And, some percentage of the time, those are Bitcoin only businesses.
Yes.
So we're investors in Casa, we're investors in River Financial.
Yep.
We're investors, in our more recent fund, we're investors in Bitcoin only businesses, Hoseki and Mash, or some newer names. And we're certainly going to continue to do that. I think that's part of my sort of role and obligation and what I'd like to do. All of that said, a lot of our startups are pretty blockchain agnostic, or they straddle dozens of blockchains, like Coinmetrics, right? Coinmetrics runs nodes for dozens and dozens and dozens of blockchains. Is there anything morally wrong with that? I don't think so, and so clearly I'm more of a moderate here, or a pluralist, but I don't apologize for that.
Yep.
I think a lot of these business models, whether it's, you're, kind of a crypto bank or a financial institution or a brokerage, necessarily entail you straddling many blockchains. That doesn't mean you're endorsing the other ones. And so, ultimately our business involves us listening to the founders first, and we take what the market gives us. And so some percentage of the time that's Bitcoin, but we're certainly not exclusively Bitcoin. And, to be realistic, I don't think that you could deploy the amount of capital we're deploying into Bitcoin only startups and continue to be selective about it. I just don't think there's that much quantity. A lot of Bitcoin development happens at the institutional level, at the level of large financial institutions, we're active there. Not a week goes by almost without me giving a talk at some large asset manager making the case for them, or other financial organization, whatever. So it's not like we're not working on behalf of Bitcoin. It's
Yeah.
just by the numbers, not that many early stage startups building on Bitcoin.
Yeah, we get it. We have a small early stage token fund, and obviously it's token fund, so it's clearly not Bitcoin, but outside of the Bitcoin holdings we have directly. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. I want to get into the latest before we get into mining. So Canada, right? So obviously you know what's going on in Canada. Recap for those watching who don't know, living in a bubble or under a rock. So Canada has basically passed these, or not passed, there's no law, it basically enacted these draconian measures that effectively allow the government to order banks to effectively seize funds for any transactions related to this, specifically to this trucking protest convoy going on, but more broadly, it can be interpreted in any number of ways. And apparently, I don't know if you saw this, but some of the funds or some of the Bitcoin-based funds were frozen last night. Did you see this?
I don't know how effective that was, but yeah, I saw that some of the addresses were sanctioned, put on a blacklist.
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
can you realistically freeze them? Maybe you can threaten the people.
I see. So when you say put on a blacklist, it's more like an OFAC list where any exchange or anybody else seeing funds coming in either has to reject or potentially freeze the funds. Um,
And yeah, there was an order, an injunction, I believe, that the Canadian government filed maybe today, about 12 hours ago, naming the individuals that were coordinating the crowdfunding, naming a bunch of service providers, and all of the Canadian exchanges, things like that, and also listing a bunch of wallet addresses. And so I think in practice, because the founder or the folks running the crowdfunding in Bitcoin were known individuals, it's not difficult for the Canadian government to sort of harass them legally.
right.
But nobody knew up front that the Canadian government would respond in such an insanely draconian manner. So
For sure.
it's not like I would have, if it had been me, I wouldn't have like taken steps to protect my identity, because I figured coordinating money being sent to truckers engaged in demonstration is not, a terrorist act.
Free country. I'm protesting. I'm exercising my democratic right to have my voice heard in a peaceful manner. Um, I'm trying to put myself in the other person's shoes to say, what is it that they really think that they're accomplishing by, instituting, again, I'll use the word draconian measures here that don't really resonate with many people. I find it hard to believe that even like there's on the ultra far left, a lot of people who are like, yeah, screw them, take the money, take their dogs, whatever,
Right.
whatever it is they're doing now. I mean, where do you come out on that?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because like where we are in sort of like political discourses is like the exercise of government power is always good if it's in support of your side, and it's always bad if it's in support of the other side, right? But for people that are more foresighted about this, including on the left, I think you'd be extremely perturbed by effectively ex post facto criminalizing donations to particular political cause,
Yeah.
right? So during the violence in 2020, there were a lot of bail funds raised, right? Like people would donate through GoFundMe and other platforms to assist individuals that were arrested, and to bail them out.
Mhm.
That wasn't an uncommon thing to do. If you were to imagine, I think you always have to imagine that the political valence is flipped, right? And so what if a hard right party came into power in Canada and it's like, okay, crowdfunding to help bail funds, that's now illegal, and it's also illegal in ex post facto ways, and like you didn't know it was illegal at the time, and now we're making it retroactively illegal, which I think in the US would be unconstitutional, but I guess maybe it's not the case in Canada.
It's not even
um
that they're saying it's illegal. It's more like it's an emergency order because you can't basically by decree in US or Canada, to my understanding, say something is illegal. You can enforce
Right.
an existing law or have an emergency degree that says we're suspending your rights, which is, again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not using the legal terms, but it's just, it's bizarre. It's bizarre in a whole new way that I've certainly never experienced in here in the US for sure, firsthand. And I'm, I'm not the youngest guy on the call. And so I suspect most Canadians haven't either. I don't know how this ends, but unless this gets unwound, it can get a lot worse, right? I mean, um,
Yeah, and the precedent here is abominable. I mean, engaging in asset seizures and immobilizations, not only for what are effectively peaceful protesters, but also people financially supporting them.
yeah,
I mean, that is banana republic type stuff, right? Like that's something I expect in Zimbabwe or Venezuela. That's not something I expect in like a country that's the top of the Heritage Foundation sort of political freedom list, right? So the fact that the Canadian government opted for this extremely harsh measure, I think shows a lot of weakness on their part. And I think it's going to alienate a lot of moderates too, even if
yeah,
you're against truckers. And like, look, the opinions are divided on the merit of the truckers, whether it's a good idea or not. I'm sure if they were parked in front of my apartment, I would be upset by it. Right. But, the precedent being set here is terrifying. Using finance, like treating regular Canadians like they're some sort of hostile foreign regime, and imposing broad-based sanctions on them. It's just everything we've been saying about state power and finance is just crystallized in this moment.
yeah, yeah. I don't know how it ends, but I seriously hope that this just gets rolled back and that they take a deep look at what they've done and figure out a way to make sure that it doesn't happen again, or that it can happen again, most importantly. And I think about our current administration, and we have this new executive order coming down the pipe in the next week or two. Now, originally, I was led to believe that the executive order would partially be about some type of committee that would be put together to investigate what's going on over 12 to 18 months. But now I'm hearing rumors that there will actually be very specific um, orders within the executive order beyond, meaning regulatory orders. I find that hard to believe, but that's what I heard this morning. I don't know if you've heard anything different, but
Yeah,
uh,
I mean, the rumors I heard about the EO were that it would be about asking for more time to study and investigate these markets. But given that the administration stance, and I've had direct contact with members of the administration on Bitcoin topics, so I can tell you the stance is not a friendly one.
not at
Uh,
all.
given that their stance is generally hostile, it wouldn't surprise me if it was something much more challenging.
Yeah,
But at the end of the day, if we experience financial repression or anything like what's happening in Canada, not that I expect that, it validates the case for Bitcoin,
absolutely.
right? So it's a lose-lose situation if you're the government and you're imposing some sort of monetary repression or
Yeah.
signaling to the world that you're terrified of a
I
non-state
saw
monetary good.
I saw a tweet from I don't know if you know Jason Calcanis, probably do because he's an investor as well, but hosts the All In podcast, and he basically tweeted what a bunch of Bitcoiners have been tweeting. He's not a Bitcoiner, even though he's a small
Not
investor.
at all. Yeah.
And his comment was, "This is the best. Canada is the best marketing Bitcoin's ever had." And obviously we all think that, right? In at least in some memeish kind of way, but for him to say it, and a lot of people that I see outside of the space saying it, really hits home, what you're saying.
Yeah, it is. And the amount of moderates I've seen radicalized by this is
Yeah,
inordinate. You just have to look around.
yeah,
And the fact that financial repression and effectively civil asset forfeiture on a mass scale, probabilistic civil asset forfeiture, deputizing all financial infrastructure for political purposes is happening in the West, in a country which is presumed to be a pretty taciturn country with ostensibly good governance.
yep,
That is radicalizing, maybe not radicalizing, but making them realize we're not immune. We are not
yep,
immune.
yep. So, all right, I can talk about Canada and free speech all day, and I'm guessing you could too. But we have some important topics to discuss. So I want to get into mining a little bit. And you published a presentation. It might even be November now. I might have I don't know my timing wrong. Correct me. But it was basically a very long PowerPoint deck. I heard your explanation of a lot of it on Palm's podcast, which was excellent. One of my very many long hikes listening to you guys. And can you basically what? Okay, let me. There's so much here. I don't even know where to start. But at the highest level, the narrative of basically Bitcoin mining is absolutely horrible for the environment, consumes insane amounts of electricity. Got a lot of people listening here who are hardcore into crypto, would love the talking points to basically educate their friends on why this is wrong.
Yeah.
What's the 30-second response, and then we can go deeper.
I think I need 3 hours, honestly. You're referring to the Texas Energy Summit presentation, I presume.
Yeah.
Yes. So basically, I used to be a bit of a skeptic around this idea that Bitcoin is good for renewables, Bitcoin mining. I actually didn't believe it because renewables, they don't produce energy all the time, especially wind and solar. They're active at a capacity factor of 30, maybe 40% if you're lucky for wind. Solar is a bit less. And because you have to run your miners all the time, presumably, as a profit maximizing entity, running your miners just on a portfolio of these renewables, like maybe doesn't make that much sense. So I was actually persuaded by that. I didn't believe that Bitcoin miners were particularly good for renewables, aside from hydro or nuclear. Now, a few things changed my mind. And the first thing was I realized that there were innovative business models where miners, and they're actually doing this, they're co-locating with your stranded renewable providers like wind and solar. They're eating up excess energy that the grid can't accommodate. And one thing I learned was that we're producing huge amounts of excess energy, in particular in places like West Texas, where there's an overbuild of renewables. And by locating there, they're the buyer of the last resort for that renewable installation. They're rescuing the economics of that, and they're making it profitable to build even more renewables. That I changed my mind on because I actually talked to a number of miners that are doing exactly that, including some of the largest energy firms in the world. So it's not just a Bitcoin miner story, it's an energy firm story as well. And you're going to start to see press releases. ConocoPhillips came out with one recently. But so that is something that I realize is actually true, and it's happening. Miners rescuing stranded, renewable economics, and then they are doing what's called grid firming much of the time, which means when those renewables aren't producing, then they pull in energy from the grid.
Yeah.
And so, it's not 100% pure renewable, but it's pretty good. Yeah. The second thing I found out, and this was a huge revelation for me, is miners are a highly benevolent load type on the grid. So even when they're on the grid itself, they're very suitable for increasingly renewable grids. So they can turn themselves off and on at short notice. They can dial themselves up and down, fractionalize their consumption in a way that virtually no other industry can do. So they are location agnostic, which means they can operate anywhere that there's energy, and they're interruptible, which means they can turn themselves off at the flip of a switch. Virtually nothing else can do this. An aluminum smelting plant can't do it. A paper and pulp mill can't do it. A steel plant can't do it. Hospital can't do it, because a data center, like a regular old data center, can't do it because they have service level, they have SLAs. They have to stay online. They need their 5 nines of uptime.
But let's put the clean energy piece aside for a second, right? I mean, by and large, energy producers aren't storing energy. They're producing energy in real time.
Yeah, you have to match the supply and demand absolutely in real time.
And so I'm not an energy expert. I understand basic physics. I took electricity and magnetism in college. I understand the basics. I understand how it works. If you're not storing electricity, effectively, it's gone.
You're dumping it.
Right. And so what percent, I mean, I don't know if you know this, but I would assume a significant, if not a majority of the electricity produced at any given moment in this country goes unutilized.
Yeah.
So,
In fact, a majority of all energy generated
of
does not
course,
make it to your wall outlet. It's
it's,
lost in transmission or it's lost at the point of generation.
so this idea that more electricity is being produced because of Bitcoin mining on the surface, even before I read your stuff, seemed ridiculous to me. And by the way, China, before they banned this, my understanding is a lot of the pools were paying off the government to access hydroelectric power stations that were actually completely unutilized because they were overbuilding cities.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, you can look at some of the data here. Yunnan and Sichuan province were curtailing on the order of 100 terawatt hours a year of hydro. So they just didn't have the transmission to move that energy long distance, right? Because those are remote areas. So that's just the reality of the energy grid is like it doesn't travel well,
Yeah.
and that's why you have these hot spots of energy, cheap, underutilized energy. You have to build very expensive high voltage transmission if you want it to travel well. Absent that, these stranded pockets can be exploited by Bitcoin miners. And, most people's mental model of energy is that if I'm consuming energy here, I'm depriving you of your energy there, which is just not the way it works. So once you get past that stage and you get into, the way that the grid actually works, it's a much better story. And so it's just a matter of educating people about how the grids work, really.
Yeah. But now, given that, even with the current downturn, we're still at 40,000 Bitcoin. It's very profitable to mine Bitcoin at these levels.
Correct. Yeah. With your newest hardware and decently priced electricity, you're still mining significantly below market price.
Yeah. And as a result, I'm seeing every day I'm either receiving an investment opportunity to come into some new mining pool, some new scheme, some new group in another country, whether it's in Eastern Europe or Middle East, whatever, or in the U.S., Texas, Wyoming, Georgia now. I read Georgia's trying to also put tax incentive in place, and apparently it's working because I've already seen the first couple of investment opportunities for Georgia. Where does this end? Where is this headed, in your opinion?
So mining will be fully integrated with the energy sector. And so already a lot of Bitcoin mining companies are service providers for energy firms, whether that's oil and gas, and the miners are engaging in flare gas miner, whether that's solar and wind, and the miners are rescuing stranded assets that exist or they're waiting for interconnection. Yeah. Or there's a wind farm next door, which means that when the wind blows, it's a correlated output. And so my wind, I can only sell it at 2 cents a kilowatt hour, right? Or whether it's actually inducing the construction of new renewables. All these things are happening. Yeah. And it's a massive benefit to energy companies that for the first time have an uncorrelated secondary buyer, which is so useful for them.
But you're saying that effectively the monetary system it becomes, in a way, managed by the energy industry via the financial incentives that align all of us.
That's going to happen, yeah. And it's very, I don't think that's cause for concern because these pockets of stranded energy are so distributed globally, right? That it's going to be a pretty distributed model ultimately, right? It's not like there's one big wind farm in Oklahoma, and that's where all the wind comes from. Turns out the sun and the wind hit the earth pretty evenly, and there's a lot of stranded hydro, floating around. So, but yeah, what we will see, fast forward 5 years from now, every energy super major will have mining as a part of its business model. Most likely, the margins for mining will be pretty thin. They'll look like energy utility margins. Yep. And your average Bitcoin will be mined with, 2 or less cent kilowatt hour energy. So very, very cheap energy. And it'll all happen, in pretty remote areas away from population centers. And what's more, every miner will be engaging in these grid stabilization programs like demand response, whereby they selectively curtail their usage at a time of stress, that's actually already the case. But it'll probably become baked into your standard energy contract that they have to do that. because miners are so suitable for that.
Yeah.
And so ultimately it'll become something that is a benevolent presence on the grid, consumes mostly renewable, and doesn't pressure energy prices anywhere, and most likely actually drives them down for regular households because it makes the grid more functional overall.
Yeah. So let's play this out, right? So 20 years from now, we've gone through, 5 more, 6 more, or 5.5 more halving cycles. And obviously the amount of Bitcoin rewards that you're getting in Bitcoin terms per block is very, very small compared to where we are now or where Bitcoin started. And so given the investments we're talking about, given the distribution across the entire energy grid that you're implying, either Bitcoin is worth $10 million per coin, or the transaction fees are massive, or some combination of the two, right? I mean, otherwise, this is kind of a 10 to 15 year phenomenon that may have to go away if what I'm saying isn't true.
All three options are possible. I don't think it is a requirement the Bitcoin security spend, aka fees plus subsidy, remains structurally elevated forever. From the perspective of someone building out an energy infrastructure with which to mine Bitcoin, there are other opportunities in terms of monetizing that energy. Bitcoin is, I've talked to all of them. Bitcoin is currently the number one largest opportunity by a lot if you have spare energy. However, there's other things you can do. Generic computation will most likely become, with GPUs or, other similar hardware, that will become a major story here. As right now the world spends like 6% of its GDP on data centers. That'll probably increase to 50% in a couple decades. There's no reason why our demand for computation would decline. It will only increase. So generic computation will just become more popular. Hydrogen production, hydrogen electrolysis, that's considered a key part of the green energy transition. That will be a very big feature of these grids. Desalination, things like that, fertilizer production. There's other things you can do with energy that is kind of stranded, where you've built the infrastructure to actually utilize it. For now, Bitcoin is the number one thing. But if you're a Bitcoin miner, you might be thinking, okay, well, do I want to diversify a little bit in case, Bitcoin transaction fees never increase or whatever, it doesn't pan out? No, that's not what I expect. But it's just to say, there's like other positive externalities that come from building out these data centers in the middle of nowhere in West Texas or whatever. There's a lot of other things you can do there. So it's not like, it's not the case that this effort will all be wasted necessarily.
Yeah. Awesome. So what about nuclear? Do you have any theories on where nuclear is going to fit in the future?
I mean, I think Bitcoin is very well suited for nuclear. We've already seen some nuclear providers. I think there's one called Okla, which have signed LOIs with Bitcoin miners saying, when we spin up our new facility, we'll be able to monetize maybe at night by selling it to Bitcoin instead of selling it to the grid, right? And so having that uncorrelated buyer that's buying energy, profitably whenever you want, wherever you want, that makes any new energy asset construction more economically worthwhile. Mm-hmm. So nuclear is no exception there. And nuclear provides steady baseload, which is great.
Yep.
So you're going to see these models that involve toggling the energy dissemination to the grid and then to Bitcoin and then to the grid, and creating a portfolio of buyers that maximizes your outcome. It's like a portfolio optimization problem, except with buyers of energy. Mm-hmm. So that will definitely be the case. Now the question is, will popular attitudes shift sufficiently in the US such that building nuclear becomes viable again? Right now, nuclear is expensive on a levelized basis, not because anything is expensive about nuclear, but because there's enormous regulatory burdens and enormous barriers. Like there's a nuclear permissioning agency in this country, and I think they haven't permitted a single nuclear plant in their entire existence.
Yeah.
So that's why nuclear is expensive. It's not because nuclear is hard. I mean, we know how to do nuclear. We've been doing it safely for like 70 years now. But so I think it just depends on whether popular attitudes change. And I think that's one of the worst things environmentalists ever did was discourage nuclear. That was one of the worst possible things they could have done for the planet.
Yeah, I mean, if you actually look at deaths per kilowatt hour, which is one of the most interesting charts I've ever seen. This a few years ago, I think Gates Foundation or somebody. I was at a TED event and I got into heated debates with progressives, wealthy progressives who just didn't get it. But some of them are waking up now.
Now they are, and it's encouraging to see environmentalists coming around on nuclear, because there's a big difference between like, oh, I feel, that it's unsafe and it offends me from an ecological perspective to create nuclear waste or whatever. And then between the actual issue, which is carbon intensity of generation. Like that's the issue. Eyes on the prize here, guys. When it comes to that issue, nuclear is your number one best performant choice.
By far. And I watch what happened in Germany, and I'm just, as somebody who lived there for a long time, yeah.
It was obscene.
It's all emotions. There's no logic in this.
And now they're buying Russian gas, right? They have to import Russian gas, and their solar and wind is not sufficient. And after Fukushima, they turned off 7 power plants in Germany, I think, nuclear. And it's not like the Fukushima earthquake tsunami could have happened in Germany. And also those were built to a fail-safe standard that was superior to the Japanese ones. So even if there had been an earthquake and somehow a tsunami in Germany, their reactors would not have failed. So it was a purely emotional decision.
Yeah. Okay. So let's switch gears. So last question. You have your eyes on a lot going on in the space. Give me 2 things going on in the crypto world that you're just crazy excited about right now that either everybody's talking about or maybe nobody's talking about.
Well, I think the integration between Bitcoin miners and the energy sector is undercovered, and the implications of that are not fully appreciated. I think it's a massive de-risking event for Bitcoin mining as an industry, because now we have the largest energy firms on the planet, including renewable energy firms that only do renewables, that are now in support of Bitcoin. They're lobbying. That defangs what has been the number one critique of Bitcoin to date, historically. Second of all, I think, consumer use cases for Lightning are actually really exploding. And that's been really slept on. Cash App just rolled out Lightning this week. Works very well. It's very impressive. I think that if you look at the numbers, there's, applications with meaningful volumes. And I think the outcome of that is it really changes the game in terms of how content is monetized on the internet, and it creates new business models for creators. And you don't have to monetize with ads or subscriptions or affiliate links anymore. You'll be able to monetize directly. So that's going to make a whole new class of content actually available that economically couldn't exist before. That is very exciting to me. And I know it's taken a while for Lightning to reach maturity, so to speak. It's been about 5 years, but it's impressive. It's impressive. And I haven't always been a Lightning bull, but seeing the actual consumer use cases here is really compelling.
Yeah, I'm in a similar camp. I was a little skeptical that the economic incentives would be there to run nodes, but you can't deny the surge in usage. Oh, and now it's from obviously a very low base, but you can't deny the surge in usage over the last 18 months. And obviously, Jack's going to do whatever he can to make this a reality, even if he has to, pay for it himself or subsidize it himself for a while. And he's got a lot of resources to do that. So he's effectively a large bank now. So yeah, I think what I'm actually interested in Lightning is to see how traditional FIs figure out financial models to create nodes for P2P, for integrating with card networks, and whether or not it really can be useful when integrated with kind of layer 3 stuff like cash outs at Western Unions and stuff where there's a floor in price today that Lightning doesn't solve. Because if you got to go from the stored value to cash, there's a fee for that Lightning can't fix. But if we can integrate with those layer 3s and eliminate the existing middlemen, then I think we're really onto something. But we'll see. I think the key is again the financial incentives.
The other thing I've been monitoring is the insertion of stable coins onto Lightning. And I think some Bitcoiners might chafe at that because they want Bitcoin to only have native tokens, aka Bitcoin itself, on Bitcoin. But the notion of, the UI of streaming payments plus doing it in a stablecoin format, it's undeniable that stablecoins are the preferred medium of exchange in the crypto industry. $150 billion.
If you're using a Bitcoin wallet, I mean, it really wouldn't, right? I mean, you have to have a new wallet specifically for USDC that ran Lightning, right?
You'd need new wallet assumptions, new designs. Yeah, the wallet developers would have to bake this into the software for sure. But
is anyone doing that?
I have heard whispers. I believe it's possible to have tokens on Lightning. If you're able to fractionalize USDC, like, to me, that's powerful, because in our current regime, like, you do have to track your basis and, like, in theory, pay taxes on, minuscule transactions if it's in Bitcoin terms and there's a capital gain. If you do it in dollar terms, you avoid that. Now, that's not pure from a Bitcoin perspective, but, I'm more of a realist. And so, I think stablecoins are pretty great as well. And so I'm excited to see what happens there.
Yeah, I also think that this issue of minuscule capital gains will go away eventually.
It will have to.
Something like less than a couple $100s a year doesn't need to be reported, which is still too small relative to things like money transfer and Western Union usage, even for migrants. But I'm guessing a lot of them aren't reporting income anyway. Super interesting. So Nick, two questions. One, where can people find that report that you mentioned? It's been a few weeks since I read it. And two, what's the best way for people to follow you and keep up with all this amazing stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, so I archive all of my content at my personal website, nickcarter.info. And I think that particular presentation you can find at .info/talks. And so it'll be there, and you'll see that I did 4 or 5 talks on Bitcoin mining last year. So maybe I can take a break this year, hopefully. And then follow me. Twitter's got to be the number one place. I don't know if I'd recommend it. I've been told I'm very annoying on there. So,
it's fun.
Exercise your own judgment.
We're allowed to have a little fun while we're getting our opinions out there too. So it's all good. If Elon can have fun, so can we.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Nick, I think you're awesome. Based upon the comments I'm getting here, I'm looking at the comments in real time from our Facebook stream, our YouTube stream, our Twitter stream. People are digging this. Even LinkedIn, I've gotten on the stream there. So a lot of interesting comments. Go check them out and maybe respond. A lot of people really resonating, by the way, with the nuclear comments. So that was interesting, which I guess I would expect here. But thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. And what we'd love to do is in a few months have you back on and get the latest on what you're seeing, and also hear about the newest investments from the fund as well.
Happy to, and thank you, Bill. And hopefully by then I'll have a nicer looking living room. So we'll see if we can set that up.
Yeah, well, otherwise you can join me here on the moon. It's all good. All right, brother. Good to see you.
All right, take care.
All right, you too. Bye-bye. All right, thanks, Nick. That was awesome.